In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Today, we have the oldest cold case in Burlington, Iowa, and this is one that police there say they have every new detective review. Now, just like how the Dawn Allen case gets to me because she just seemingly vanishes and they have like no answers, no leads, this story is crazy to me because they seemingly have so much to work with. But there are just no answers. They have what looks like the perfect suspect, so many witnesses, a very unique looking car, a lot of evidence, but they still, to this day, have not been able to solve this case. So let's dive into the story of Dorothy Miller. When Fred Miller woke up at 5 a.m. on August 19th, 1969, he was surprised to find that his wife, Dorothy Miller, wasn't home. See, the previous night, Dorothy, a real estate agent, had a scheduled showing for a client around 7:30 p.m. at a house on Grand Street in Burlington, Iowa. And because it was a late showing, Fred had gone to bed around 8:30 p.m. because he had to wake up early the next morning for work. But she should be home. So Fred called their daughter, who was 27 years old at the time, and the two of them drove to go find her. Now, there's a couple of conflicting reports on where the two went first, but according to an article in the Quad City Times published on August 19th, 1969, they were heading to the house the showing was at, but they actually found Dorothy's abandoned car on the way and then went to police to report her missing. Now, another article written by Andy Hoffman and published in 2015 in the Iowa Press Citizen says that Fred and his daughter actually went to the Maple Leaf Tavern first. And I'll talk about that tavern later, but they apparently found her car, then parked a block away, and then went to the police station. Now, I also saw another article that says that it was the police that found the vehicle and not Fred and the daughter, but either way, after Fred and their daughter reported Dorothy missing, police make their way to the home where she had this showing the night before. Now, the back door of the home, which was a two-bedroom, two-story house, was unlocked when police arrived. On the first floor of this home, they found a brick and what is described sometimes as rope and other times as nylon cord. Now, they make their way upstairs and they find Dorothy. She was lying in a large closet. Her hands were bound. Her dress was pulled up to her chest. Her underclothes, pantyhose, and shoes were off, and her bra was loose. She had been raped, beaten, and stabbed 23 times in the head, neck, and back. Now, there was no weapon found at the scene, but police believe Dorothy was likely struck in the head soon after entering the home, like probably with this brick. And then they believe that she was tied up, assaulted, and then moved to the closet where she was then stabbed to death. Now, police also searched her vehicle and it was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. Her purse was missing. And there was an unused camera flash cube found on the front seat. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, officers descended on the scene and they did a massive canvass of the neighborhood. I mean, some reports say that they talked to almost like 200 people in the neighborhood. Neighbors and witnesses said that they were sitting on their front porch and they saw Mrs. Miller and a man enter the house around 8 p.m. Now, they say they didn't hear any sort of commotion or screaming or fighting, but they noticed later on in the night that Mrs. Miller's car was gone from where it had been parked down the street. And I can imagine at the time, like, they probably didn't think anything of it. I'm guessing it's a small town. They maybe knew that she was a real estate agent going to show the house. They see her walk in, and then later when they see the car isn't there, they're probably, I mean, they probably didn't even think about it. But if they did, they're just like, okay, the showing's over. But anyways, the fact that neighbors saw her go into the place with the man was very promising. I mean, I can only imagine at this point, they have to believe that the man she was showing the house to was the man responsible for her murder. But what was even more promising was that Dorothy's husband, Fred, had met this man. Just a few days prior to Dorothy's murder, Fred had actually gone with Dorothy to show this same client this same house. And the client was a man named Robert Clark. And just the Friday before Dorothy went missing, Fred had actually accompanied her to show Clark this house for the first time. Fred and Dorothy had picked up Clark that night near the Maple Leaf Tavern and brought him to the house. And after viewing the home, Clark said he wanted to show pictures of the house to his wife, so he requested another showing for the following night. Now, Dorothy wasn't able to accommodate that time, so a Saturday viewing, but agreed to show him the property again on Monday evening. And Fred didn't go with for this visit. And, I'm kind of guessing that maybe Dorothy felt uncomfortable showing this man the house alone on Friday, which is why she had Fred go with. Um, I read that she was the only female real estate agent in Burlington at the time. So it makes sense to me that she would bring her husband with on that first showing. You want someone with you to make you feel comfortable. But, after your husband meets this man and, you kind of talk, whatever, if he wants to see a second showing, I can imagine that it doesn't maybe seem like as big of a deal and you wouldn't have your husband go with. And that paired with the fact that Fred had to work the next morning, it was a late showing. I think it makes sense that she ended up going by herself. Now, it looks like they had arranged for Dorothy to call Clark at the Maple Leaf Tavern around 7 p.m., where Dorothy then went and picked him up to then go to the showing. In an article published in the Des Moines Register on August 20th, 1969, Dorothy and Fred's daughter says, "My mother had my dad go with her Friday night because the man wanted to be picked up at a drugstore at 10th and Maple Streets. She didn't want to go alone. They let him out of the car near where my mother's car was found after showing the house. She said that he was vague about where he lived and worked, and it seems like he said he was from Des Moines, Iowa, but was going to be moving to Burlington later on." Now, because Dorothy had arranged to pick up Clark at the Maple Leaf Tavern, there were plenty of people who had seen him. This, paired with Fred's description, a composite sketch was able to be made. Robert Clark was described as being 5'11", good looking, dark haired, and a clean cut man in his 20s or 30s. But the sketch, honestly, is not very helpful. It's very generic. But beyond his looks, witnesses at the tavern were also able to give police information on his movements just before Dorothy picked him up. So witnesses said they saw Clark leave the tavern, go to a black truck, and remove an unidentified object. A few minutes later, a witness saw Dorothy pick up Clark as he walked outside of a pharmacy a few doors down from the tavern. Now, I've been trying to find more information on what this object could have been. And my first thought was perhaps it was the brick they found in the home, because I can't think of I couldn't think of a reason why there would just be a brick in there. But then you have to meet up with Dorothy and you're holding a brick. That seems unlikely to me. So what I think he grabbed was probably a camera. And if you remember, the Robert Clark guy said he wanted to see the home again to take pictures for his wife, and a camera flash cube was found in her front seat. So, investigators definitely believe that everything Clark said about himself was made up. Just like I'm assuming, obviously, that the story about wanting to take pictures of the house for his wife was made up. But I'm wondering if it was his camera and he was just kind of using it as a prop to further his story. But anyways, back to what the witnesses were saying. They also said that the car he was driving was a black cab over engine pickup. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will put up a picture of the pickup and of the composite sketch. But this pickup is a pretty unique looking vehicle. Um, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a pickup that looks like this. And I mean, like, I'm not a car person, but whatever. But I can't find anything anywhere that indicates that they were ever able to find this vehicle again. So now, when I first researched this case, I thought to myself that surely someone would have been identified. I mean, multiple people saw this man. He had a very unique looking vehicle. Dorothy's husband, I mean, since she had accompanied him on that first showing, I'm assuming he spoke to him a little bit. So it's like you had to have gotten a good look at it. But they didn't. They never found this man, and no one ever reported seeing him again. Now, a psychiatrist at the time told the Burlington Hawkeye a few days after police discovered Dorothy's body that the murder seemed to be so well planned and carried out that I feel the killer is a sociopath with previous experience. And I tend to think that this is also true. But assuming this Robert Clark who viewed the house is the killer, it seems so bold to me that he would allow himself to be in public, interact with Dorothy's husband, all of this. But this fact alone is also what makes investigators believe that he is not someone who lives in the Burlington area. Burlington, Iowa was a smaller community, and investigators believe that someone would have recognized him or something would have stood out about him if he lived in the local area. Let's dive a little bit deeper into some parts of this crime. I want to talk a little bit about the crime scene, but I really want to focus on some of the behaviors that we see from Robert Clark before the murder. So, what I want to figure out first is how did Robert Clark find Dorothy? Now, I have looked through hundreds of newspaper articles in the archives in researching this case. And one of the things I was also looking for was if Dorothy or this home that she was showing were listed in any sort of real estate advertisements in the newspaper before her death. Now, from what I've read in newspaper articles, Dorothy worked for the real estate agency Bullock Realty for about 2 years. And she was apparently the only female real estate agent at that time. In my research, I couldn't find any ads specifically from Bullock Realty. I couldn't find anything using Dorothy's name. I couldn't find anything relating to the address of the home, but there were a lot of real estate ads at that time. And in those ads, I saw frequently that they would have the address of the home, the name of the real estate agent, and a phone number. So my guess is either through a newspaper ad or by looking her up in the phone book, it would have been very easy to find Dorothy's name and call to inquire about this specific home or any home that she was showing at the time. Because when you think about it, if an offender is looking for the quote unquote perfect victim, everyone knows that real estate agents are frequently alone with clients in empty homes. This would give someone like Robert Clark the perfect opportunity to commit this type of crime. What strikes me, though, about the murderer, again, assuming that that is Robert Clark, is that he was so determined to go through with this plan, even though Dorothy's husband Fred and multiple people downtown saw him. So not only did he take the time to find Dorothy and specifically target her, but he was so set on going through with this plan that if the Friday showing was the day he originally intended to kill her, it didn't matter that Fred was there. He was still going to do it anyway. Now, when I think about that Friday showing, I don't know if perhaps maybe Dorothy had told Robert Clark that her husband Fred would be accompanying them. Maybe during the phone call, she had said, "Hey, well, my husband and I will pick you up downtown." But either way, he wasn't worried about having another person see him before committing the crime. And I definitely think that supports the theory that he was not from the local area and that he had no plans to remain there for any amount of time following the murder. And now, either way, whether or not Robert Clark knew that Fred was going to be there. The Friday showing was kind of beneficial for him because it gave him a chance to scope out the location of the murder. This could have been in addition to any other sort of surveillance that he was conducting on the property at that time. I think about the time of day that he chose for the showing. He wanted to do an evening showing both on Friday and on Monday. And according to Dorothy's daughter at the time, this was not something that Dorothy usually did. She usually did daytime showings. And the evening showing time to me it makes me wonder if Robert Clark thought that doing this in the evening would be less risky. Perhaps he thought that there's less daylight for people to see him, but there would be more people home because it's in the evening. So I think that there would be a higher chance that someone hears something. So I guess I'm interested in why he specifically chose an evening showing. After that Friday showing, Robert Clark was able to make up a story about why he wanted to go back to the home to see it again. He, if you remember, said that he had a wife and he wanted to take pictures of the property for her. Now, he was able to diminish his threat level enough on that Friday showing that Dorothy didn't feel the need to bring Fred or anyone else with that second time. And I mean, either that or Clark was just really lucky that Fred had to work the next morning, which is why Fred remained home and didn't go with her. Now, assuming that Robert Clark is not from the local area, and I don't believe he was, I am wondering about where he was staying at the time. From what we've read, Clark had Dorothy pick him up in a public place near the Maple Leaf Tavern and a pharmacy downtown. They also dropped him off down there on Friday. He also had Dorothy call him at the Maple Leaf Tavern when she was on her way to pick him up Monday evening. So they're never picking him up at a motel. They're never calling him at a motel. And I can't find a map of downtown Burlington from the 60s, but I haven't read anything indicating that there were any motels near where he was picked up and dropped off at. This means there's no sort of clue as to where he was staying that perhaps could have led people to learn more about his identity. On another note, why was Dorothy picking up Robert Clark to begin with? Why wasn't Clark meeting her at the home in his own vehicle? If you recall, he had a pretty distinct vehicle. It was a black cab over engine pickup. And it's a strange looking car. I mean, again, I'm not a car person, so if you know more about cars and these were not that unusual, let me know. But it looks pretty strange to me. And I saw another article that said the paint job was also pretty unusual. Some described it as having a rough paint job, like not something that the manufacturer would have done. But he possibly doesn't want to meet her in his vehicle because if he's driving it down to the home, that's just more people that are going to see it. And the only mention of his vehicle comes from witnesses at the Maple Leaf Tavern who saw him go grab something out of it prior to getting picked up by Dorothy the evening of the murder. And I don't know exactly where he was parking this truck. Maybe it was in the tavern parking lot, maybe it was down the road. I'm not sure. Now, let's get to the crime scene. The home Dorothy was showing was about a mile away from the pharmacy, the tavern, and where Dorothy picked up Clark. That home is still there today. It looks basically the same as it did back in the 60s, just slightly updated. The neighborhood looks pretty typical. The houses are somewhat close together. It's not like there's, a very tiny little patch of grass in between, but they're not super far apart, not super close. It's a pretty standard looking neighborhood. The neighborhood overall doesn't look to be too upscale, just kind of like a standard American neighborhood. The home itself, it's a two-story home. It's 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, over 1,400 square feet. The house in 1969 was being sold for a little over $15,000. From what I saw online, that would be around 129 to maybe 135,000 today. Its Zestimate on Zillow at the moment says it could be worth around $89,000, if that means anything to anybody. Now, according to news reports from the time, the back door was unlocked. I don't particularly think there's anything significant about this. I could see that they just pulled up and that was the door that they used, was just the back door. So it makes sense to me that all the other doors would be locked. Um, on the first floor, police found a brick, again, some sort of rope or nylon cord. I don't know where specifically on the first floor this was, and I don't know exactly how much of the rope there was or how big the brick was. Um, Upstairs, Dorothy was found again in a large closet. She was lying face down. Her hands were tied. I saw some reports saying that they were tied in front of her. Uh, her dress was pulled up. Her underclothes were off. Shoes were off. And she had been stabbed 23 times in the head, neck, and back. Now, it also says she was beaten. They don't specify what they mean by the word beaten, like if physically beaten with like fists and kicks, or if they mean that she was beaten with the brick, because I think they know that she was hit with the brick, but I don't know if she was like physically beaten by the offender as well. Now, I've read conflicting assessments on specifically what happened and in what order. Some say she was likely struck soon after entering the home, tied up, brought upstairs, assaulted, and murdered. Others say she was probably hit in the head after the assault, but before the murder. Um, I think I can better imagine that she was struck with the brick when they entered the home, and then she was tied up and perhaps carried upstairs if she was unconscious, and then probably placed in the closet, her clothing removed, assaulted, and then stabbed to death. And I just think that because the brick was downstairs. Now, my assumption is that the home was completely vacant. She's showing him the property in the evening. There's no mention anywhere that the people selling the home were still living there. My guess is that none of their things were there. And so, because of that, the offender would have had to have brought a knife and rope with him. I can see it being easy to conceal a knife, but I wonder how he was concealing the rope that he brought with. I don't know the quantity of the rope that he had, but it's still kind of an unusual thing to try to carry. Like, you can't really put it in your pocket. He did say he wanted to go there to take pictures of the home, so maybe he left it in a bag that he said was a camera bag. He stabbed her 23 times. That to me is so extreme and excessive. And it would have been a very bloody scene. And he had to have left the house after that, drove her car back downtown to where he was picked up. He's not going to walk down there if he's covered in her blood. But if he drove her car, my guess is that he would have gotten blood all over it. There's no mention if there was any blood found in the car. But I would have to assume that there was some in there unless he wiped it down, but I don't know why he would. The only thing reports say about her car was that it was unlocked, keys were in the ignition, her purse was missing, and that an unused camera flash cube was in there. Now, I haven't seen anything on if they found the purse, and I haven't read anything else about the flash cube, but I am guessing that the flash cube belonged to Clark because he said that he wanted to go there to take pictures for his wife. It has been over 55 years, and Dorothy's case remains unsolved. Dorothy was 48 years old when she was murdered. She was a well known and respected member of the community and a grandmother of two. Before getting her real estate license, Dorothy worked at the Iowa Army ammunition plant and as a proofreader for the Burlington Hawkeye Gazette newspaper. Dorothy's husband Fred died in 2002 without seeing justice for his wife's murder. Now, like I said, her murder is Burlington, Iowa's oldest cold case. Police there say her case file remains open, and every police officer who becomes a detective is familiar with the case. Lieutenant Jeff Klein, commander of Burlington's Criminal Investigation Division, said, "We send every officer to a 2-week homicide school when they become a detective. When they return, we hand them the Dorothy Miller file and ask them to review it to see if we have missed anything." Now, in my reading, there are a few references to evidence that was collected and sent off for testing. It doesn't specify what exactly, but if this person killed again, which I have to think that they did, if they got DNA from him from the scene, I just wonder if it would be able to be tested again or matched to anyone in the system. It just seems to me like there's so much information out there that someone has to know something. Like someone in another town, there has to be like a similar case somewhere else. I don't know. If you have any information at all about Dorothy Miller's murder or the man who identified himself as Robert Clark, please contact the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation at 515-725-6010 or the Burlington Police Department at 319-753-8375. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself.